You're listening to Sharky on sharkgoeschomp. Tonight, we have 3 encounters with the black-eyed children, submitted by various users across the internet. The Marine and the Black-Eyed Kids. I'm a Marine stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I live in the infantry barracks off of River Road. I recently had a rather strange encounter with a pair of black-eyed kids. I live on the 3rd floor of the barracks that have open walkways on the outside and the rooms are on the inside. This happened a weekend back in November of 2009. It was a weekend, so almost every Marine was out, either home, drinking, or sleeping. Only a handful were left in the barracks awake. I'd stayed in that weekend because I was broke and had no money to go out. I was watching a movie when I heard a knock on my door. Figuring it was my roommate who just lost his key again, I went and opened it. Instead of a drunken roommate, I found 2 little kids standing on the walkway. Only these kids freaked the hell out of me. I don't know what it was about them, but as a Marine, we're always told to listen to that little voice in your head because it just might save your life from an IED or improvised explosive device. Right then, that voice was screaming at me to shut the door and lock it. There was also the fact that these kids had absolutely pitch black eyes. I mean, no white or any color to them whatsoever, just solid black. But I pushed those things aside and asked them what they were doing so late. They responded by saying that it was really cold out and they wanted to come in and read. I was confused as hell because I've never met a kid that wants to read. Also, there was no mention of any parents or anything else you'd expect a lost couple of kids to say. I couldn't take my eyes off their pitch black eyes. It was like they were just sucking me in. I felt horrible and was suddenly frightened for my life, like I needed to immediately take cover. They just stared at me with those goddamn eyes. I took a quick look up and down the walkway to see if any of the Marines were out, but there was nobody in sight. I turned back to the kids, who I noticed had taken a step forward toward me. I got the feeling like I was being hunted, like these kids were predators and out for their next meal or something. Instinct gave way to reason, and I decided to listen to that voice and shut the door and locked it. I heard soft, constant knocking for the next 5 minutes before I heard my window rattle, and then nothing. I went down to the officer on duty the next morning and asked him about it, and he said he hadn't heard of or seen any kids in the area at all, and dismissed it, saying that I probably had too much to drink last night. Only I hadn't been drinking at all or anything like that. I don't know what or who these kids were, but I doubt any of the families here will let their kids wander around at night, especially on a military base. My friend died after meeting the black-eyed children and their caretaker. I just read the Week in Weird witness report from the woman who said she's dying after letting the black-eyed kids into her home. And I want to share a story about a very close friend of mine who met up with these children and now who is dead. My friend took a road trip to see a friend near Arcata, California. They visited, said their goodbyes, and he stopped by a bar to have a drink before going to his hotel for the night. The bartender was a beautiful woman. My friend was extremely attractive, and she served him and chatted and smiled. After a few more drinks, the woman told him he could stay at her place. She said to leave his car there and she would drive him back the next day, as her place was hard to find and somewhat remote, and he took her up for it. He told me later that he began to feel very fearful when they arrived at her home. She took him to her room, and of course the inevitable sex experience. He said that he was actually frightened of her then as well, as she was not acting normally, and sounded almost inhuman in a way. After laying in bed for a while, the woman had fallen asleep, and he got up to get water from the kitchen. But as he was walking to the sink, he saw numerous small, frightening-looking children walking to and fro about the place. It was a large 2-story house. He wondered what they were doing up at 2 to 3 a.m., or if they even had school the next day. He also said they looked at him with completely black eyes, and he was terrified of them, and that he had a horrible feeling about each and every one of them. It turns out the woman owned the bar, and she did return him the next day. She forced him out, and he had to walk to the highway. I met up with him a week or two later, and he seemed perfectly fine, but a little frazzled. About a month later, this extremely healthy, athletic individual was diagnosed with bladder cancer, and no medication or treatment would impact his condition. He believed it was directly related to the experience with the black-eyed children in Arcata, and he died about 6 months after his diagnosis. I let the black-eyed children inside my house. Let me start by saying that I know how hard this will all be to believe, but now that things have taken a turn for the worse, I started looking for stories similar to mine, and found Weak and Weird. I feel like I should share this story with someone, and your website seems like the right place. I made the mistake of letting the black-eyed kids inside, and now I'm worried that I might die because of it. I hope this will be a warning to everyone who's ever in the position to make the same mistake that I did. I live just outside of a rural town in Vermont. It's a tight-knit community where everyone knows one another and people don't lock their doors at night. There just has never been a reason to need to. A little over a year ago, I woke up because I heard a loud banging on my front door. At the time, my husband and I lived in a small home on a dirt road just off the rural route into town. It was the middle of the snowstorm, and the nearby hills get very slippery in the snow, so I thought that someone might have been in an accident broken down. It's happened before. When I looked out the window, I could see that our motion spotlight was on. I could see that there were footprints in the snow that had come from our road and into our driveway, but there was no car anywhere. The snow was still covering the road, and no one had driven on it for at least a couple hours. Our front door was obscured from the window, but I could see that someone was standing there. I wasn't sure what to think, so I woke my husband up just to feel safer. While I was telling him what's going on, the banging on the door started again, and my husband went to answer it while I stood in the hallway. When he opened the door, there were 2 children standing in the snow looking toward the ground. There was a boy and a girl, and it could not have been more than 8 years old. They were dressed strangely and had odd haircuts. The girl's hair was very long and straight, and the boy had a dated haircut that looked almost like a bowl cut. They weren't dressed for winter, and my first thought was that they must have been Mennonite children, but as far as I know, there was never a large community of Mennonites near us. Thinking back on it, I know that my normal reaction to seeing the children in a snowstorm would have been to rush them inside and bundle them up with some blankets and hot cocoa, but that's not how this felt. The children were very unnerving. They would not make eye contact, and when my husband asked them if everything was okay, they asked if they could come in. My husband looked at me like, "What do I do?" And I asked the kids where their parents were. "They'll be here soon," is all they said. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, so the only reasonable thought in my head was that there must have been an accident, and these kids just got lost. As much as my instincts told me to not bring them inside, I did anyway. I went into the kitchen to make them some hot cocoa while my husband took them into the living room. While I was fixing the kettle, I could hear my husband talking to the kids. He was asking if they were okay, where they came from, how far they walked, if their parents' car was broken down, things like that. But they always answered, "Our parents will be here soon." They spoke in a sing-songy voice. They weren't afraid to be in a stranger's home at all. I started to notice that our cats, we had 4 of them, were all hiding except Pigeon, who was in the kitchen with me. Normally, our cats are very curious and friendly, and we have to be careful that they don't run out the door when we leave. This time, none of them even tried to see who was here, which I thought was very strange. All of the hair on Pigeon's neck was standing up, and his tail was puffed up, while he looked into the living room. When I bent down to pet him and see what was wrong, he hissed and started growling and backing up until he hid himself under the kitchen island. I have never seen him do that before. When I walked back into the living room, the kids were sitting on the couch, as still as can be, but my husband was holding his head in his hands. I asked him what was wrong, and he just said that he felt very dizzy all of a sudden, but he was fine. I turned back to the children to give them their cocoa, but when they looked at me, I gasped. It took everything inside of me not to drop the mugs and run away. When they looked at me, their eyes were completely black. They had no whites, just giant black pupils. When they saw that I was scared, they stood up and asked if they could use the bathroom. I tried to be as composed as I could be and showed them down the hall. They went into the bathroom together, and I hurried back to my husband to ask him if he had seen their eyes. He had seen them, and said that it looked like his brother's badly bruised eyes after a car accident. We were in the middle of talking about whose children they could be when my husband's nose started to bleed. He never had nosebleeds as long as I'd known him. I just knew inside myself that this had something to do with the kids in the bathroom, and I started crying while I ran to get my husband some tissues. That's when the power went out. I heard my husband yell my name from the living room, and as I started to walk back through the hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. The two children were standing in the end of the hallway. They weren't moving, and I had never been so scared in my whole life. They just stood there, in the dark. After what felt like forever, the boy said, "Our parents are here." And they walked to the door, opened it, and walked out, leaving it wide open. My husband jumped up to go close it and almost fell over. We looked out the window and saw two men standing by a black car idling at the end of our driveway. The men looked like they were wearing black-colored suits and were very tall, at least 6 feet. When my husband waved at them, they just stared at us, got into the car, and drove off. Our power came on about half an hour later, but nothing was the same after that. Over the next few months, 3 of our cats went missing. We can only assume that they ran away somewhere and never came back. But the worst thing was coming home to find Pigeon in a puddle of blood on the living room floor. He looked like he had been vomiting blood. The vet told us that he had some kind of hemorrhage. After my husband's nosebleeds became a regular occurrence, we went to see the doctor. He didn't know what to make of it other than dry nasal passages, but my husband was diagnosed with an aggressive skin cancer. When the doctor asked if he used tanning beds, we both thought he was joking, but apparently this kind of melanoma is linked to overuse of indoor tanning. The doctors think we will recover, but don't understand how it got so bad so quickly. My husband has never worked an outdoor job and spends relatively little time in the sun. Since we let the black-eyed kids inside our home, I've also suffered from regular dizzy spells and nosebleeds on a regular basis. I've had other issues, which I won't mention here, but trust me when I say that I am suddenly in the worst condition of my life, and no one can do anything about it. I know that all this is because I let the black-eyed children into my home. We've told everyone we could about the strange kids that showed up that night, but no one else saw them, and some even laugh at how scared we were of the Mennonite kids, but we know what we saw. I wish my husband had never opened that door. Feel free to publish this as a warning to others about black-eyed kids. My advice would be to lock your doors, call the police, and wait for morning. Just don't make the same mistake that I did. This is Sharky with sharkgoeschomp. I hope that you enjoy this collection of stories. Please subscribe for more stories, and let me know if you encountered with any weird knocks and strange little children with black eyes, or even in the aftermath, maybe a black car sitting outside your driveway with black-suited men. Have a good night.